Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to take a walk to a couple church sites as we discuss something that I haven't thought about in a little while. Do you remember this quote? This is from the April 2019 General Conference. It's President Nelson's talk called Come Follow Me. And at the end of the talk, he said something a little shocking, at least to me, and I know many of you. He said, "Now, as president of his church, I plead with you who have distanced yourselves from the church, and with you who have not yet really sought to know that the Savior's church has been restored. Do the spiritual work to find out for yourselves, and please do it now. Time is running out." And you have to watch and see how he said that last part. And please do it now. Time is running out. So it's been a little while since we've talked about this quote. We did it more last year. And just really ever since I started the channel. I started my channel in 2021 and he said that in 2019. And I felt like this was a big hint. Just the way that he said it. Not just the fact that he said these words, but it's the way that he said it. His body language, facial expression, tone of voice, everything, right? So I just got a comment on a recent video. This is from Wendy Ray. And she said, "Isn't the next April General Conference 7 years since President Nelson's declaration that time is running out?" And I don't think I ever thought about it in those terms, because up until this point, I was looking at 5 years. So 5 years from April 2019 would take you till to April 2024. And indeed, around that time, there were some interesting things that happened. And the reason why I was thinking 5 years is because for two reasons. One is I think it was the 2015 First Presidency Christmas devotional that Elder Bednar, he gave a talk about Christmas, and he asked the congregation, the audience, to imagine themselves listening to the prophet Samuel the Lamanite saying that Christ would come in 5 years. And then he goes through this thing where he has you imagine what it would be like. And it was interesting because 5 years after 2015 was 2020. And some major things happened in 2020. And so the idea was that maybe from April 2019 until April 2024, or just that general time frame, maybe something would happen. A couple things that did happen that I think are very significant is, number one, the Kirtland Temple came back into the church. Again, I cannot stress. I don't know, if you're a convert, I don't know that it would impact you as much, but being a lifelong member of the church and having grown up with the fact that the Kirtland Temple belonged to another church, that it was owned by Community of Christ, I didn't think it would actually happen, or that it wouldn't happen until after the second coming or something like that. But it did. 5 years after President Nelson said time is running out. And when he says time is running out, I think it's in reference to the second coming. Okay, I'm not going to get into all that, but I believe that it's in reference to the second coming, the way that he says it. A couple other notable things happened at that 5-year mark. Not exactly at 5 years in April, but just the year 2024. So in addition to the Kirtland Temple coming back into the church, just a few months before, so I guess 2023, but just a few months before 2024, that's when the war broke out in Israel, the October 7th attacks, which here we are in 2025, and this whole thing has not concluded yet. And I'm not going to go through a whole history of everything that's happened since October of 2023, but there have been some pretty dramatic things taking place in Israel. Not just between Israel and Hamas, but also Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and Yemen, Israel and the militias in Syria and Iraq. And then probably one of the more, well, I'd say the most dramatic thing was the initial attack, but uh, almost like right there with it was what's now called the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, where there's just this back and forth of bombing and then sending over ballistic missiles and drones. Uh, it was a little bit crazy. It was a time that had been talked about for so long in the news. This like big conflict between Israel and Iran, like a hypothetical that was just sometime in the future and could it be prevented? Well, we saw it, and I don't know if it's the end, but anyway, the point is at around the 5 year mark from the time that President Nelson said time is running out, we have this major war that started, and it still hasn't concluded, and we don't know how it's going to conclude. Right now, it doesn't seem too crazy, but you and I don't know what the next big escalation could be or what this could turn into. I still tend to think that this is related to, or that this is the actual war of Gog and Magog. And then, I'm not doing a comprehensive list of all the things that happened around the 5 year mark, but I have a third thing. So the first major thing, Kirtland Temple. The next major thing, the war in Israel. And a third major thing that happened in 2024 was that's when President Nelson gave his big Second Coming talk. He's talked a lot about the Second Coming, but that was the one talk that was exclusively about the Second Coming. And there were so many interesting things in that talk. We've dissected it, and it was very intentional. It was very well thought out, and it was a landmark talk. That's when President Nelson said, "Now's the time for you and for me to prepare for the Second Coming." And I think people just take that as like, oh yeah, we need to be ready for the Second Coming, that's always out there in the future somewhere. No. 2019, time is running out. 2024, now is the time for you and I to prepare for the Second Coming. Sister Nelson has said that President Nelson is not given to hyperbole. He doesn't exaggerate, right? So, okay. Oh no. Let's do a fourth thing. No, let's do a fifth thing. Sorry. That's the year 2024 that he turned 100 years old. That was a big landmark. That was a big milestone in this church's history. Okay, and then, excuse me, it was in that year, 2024, that the 200th temple of the church was dedicated, the Deseret Peak, Utah temple. So between 2019 and 2024, there were a lot of big things that happened, including the year 2020, which involved the pandemic and the temples suddenly being taken away in the sense that they were closed down. That by itself should probably be a warning to us. It's kind of like that video I did a little while ago where we walked from the Independence Visitor Center to the W.W. Phelps print shop location in Independence. I showed that video. That video was about how things can just suddenly change. What you thought was safe can just suddenly be taken from you. And that's what happened in 2020. Just one day, we kind of saw it coming a little bit, but I think it was still a shock to everybody when the announcement was made that all temples were being closed. And we didn't know when they would be reopened. So we're coming to a similar thing in the Second Coming. It is going to happen. I think that it's going to be sudden. I think a lot of people think that They're going to have plenty of warning. And yes, I think that you will. But like we see the signs. You and I, we see the signs. I'm keeping track of the signs on my spreadsheets. But so we get a sense that it's coming and that it's soon. But even so, I think that whenever it actually happens, I think it's going to be a surprise. No one knows the day or the hour, right? And Christ said, I come in an hour that ye think not. And I'm pretty sure that I would be included in that with all this tracking that I'm trying to do. So, you know, I feel like we're being given warnings. It can happen anytime. Uh, I'm not going to go into the whole prophecies thing because I feel like we could find out, oh, yeah, that was already fulfilled. It just happened in a way that you didn't think. So, with that being said, okay, so that was the 5-year window. It's come and it's gone. Crazy things have happened, especially in that year, 2024. Well, okay, so now let's talk about Wendy Ray's comment on that video. 7 years. I would not be surprised if crazy things happen in 2026. So 2026 is going to be the year before the rededication of the Salt Lake Temple. That's another thing that I think some people may have people in a false security, thinking that the second coming will not happen until the Salt Lake Temple is rededicated. So we're safe, right? I'm not so sure. Christ said he comes in an hour that we think not. And at this point, as far as I can tell, I did a video about it, but then I saw a little bit more news. But at this point, I think that all the seismic upgrades to the Salt Lake Temple have been completed. So that might be the most important part when it comes to the renovations and being prepared for the second coming, being prepared for the great earthquake. You know, it may be that the Salt Lake Temple is rededicated. Who knows? Maybe by Christ himself, because the second coming will have already taken place. That's a possibility. So what we know as far as the rededication goes, by the way, is that the open house is going to go from April until October of 2027. And then if it's like other temples, the rededication will just be a couple weeks later or potentially like a month later. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be rededicated in 2027. But 2026, specifically April General Conference of 2026, that will be the 7-year mark from the time that President Nelson said time is running out. Could it be that the meeting of Adam-ondi-Ahman takes place at that time? Now, again, Joseph Fielding Smith said that the majority of the church is not going to know about Adam-ondi-Ahman. I'm not going to get into that debate. So maybe it's going to be a big thing like some people imagine. Maybe it's not. But maybe the key meetings of Adam-ondi-Ahman, will that take place in 2026? Christ coming to the New Jerusalem, whatever that means. I feel like there's different ways that can happen. I recently did a video about that. Or I don't know, could some just key event or even the final appearance itself, could that happen in 2026? We'll just have to see. But there have been so many things with sevens ever since I started this channel, all throughout President Nelson's presidency. Right. So one thing that I can't believe is that the way that things worked out, for example, is that he turned 100 years old, and then a few months later, so he turned 100 years old, September 9th of 2024. And then just a few months later, January 14th of 2025, he hits his 7-year anniversary as president of the church. Those two things coincided. Those are two special numbers, 100 and 7. Also, Uh, he hit him and President Oaks hit their 40-year anniversary as apostles. The Sunday of General Conference, April 2024. And then the day after that, the day after their anniversary, that's when you had the total solar eclipse, the day after conference, and the path of totality went over the Kirtland Temple. So it really is, there really is reason to believe that something special could happen in 2026 because of this warning from the prophet. It seemed like special things happened 5 years later. So yeah, why not 7 years later? And then after that, if the official second coming hasn't happened by that time, maybe 10 years later, maybe 2029, something will happen. So it's just something to think about. And there's reason to believe that because we've seen it before. And the point of this video is not to go through the entire list of reasons to believe that. But I think it's a really, really interesting idea. I really do. And, there's all sorts of other things that you can think about too. You can think about the year 2020, for example. That was the hinge point in the history of the church, according to President Nelson. That's when we had that special general conference. 7 years later, interestingly, 7 years later, that's when the Salt Lake Temple is going to be dedicated in 2027. So that's kind of interesting how that played out. And do you remember that originally the Salt Lake Temple was supposed to be rededicated in 2024. That was the original plan, was 2024, but it kept getting delayed. So there's just so many things. Another thing to think about, and I guess we'll probably close on this, is October 2022 General Conference is another General Conference that really sticks out to me. Because in his talk called Overcome the World and Find Rest, that's where he made reference to the sign of the Son of Man. That's where he said, between now and the time that the Savior returns, we'll see the greatest manifestations of the Savior's power the world has ever seen. And the faithful will be blessed with privileges and blessings and miracles. And then later on in the talk, he called on us to be the people of the second coming. And he also had a special look in his eyes and in his countenance as he said that, in his tone of voice. So I guess kind of like the big ones for me is April 2019, where he said time is running out. April 2020, because that was a milestone conference. October 2022, calling on us to be the people of the second coming. And then October 2024, because that was his big second coming talk, was during that conference. Just amazing things. Amazing things. Things that I've never seen before. Again, I don't really remember too much from before President Hinckley because I was young, but I remember being pretty excited about things during President Hinckley's time because that was a time when a lot of things were happening that we hadn't seen before. All sorts of things happening in and around Temple Square, the conference center, the Main Street Plaza, the Living Christ came out in the year 2000. All the temples were being built. So that was an exciting period of time. And then we had President Monson, and just surface value. Like, we weren't privy to everything that was going on behind the scenes, because it's not like President Nelson just came up with all the things that are happening right now. A lot of these things were in the works, like all these changes that we've seen in the church. A lot of them were probably happening during the planning it out and thinking about these changes was probably taking place during President Hinckley's time and President Monson's time. But from our point of view, President Monson's time seemed kind of quiet, like relatively quiet, just as far as announcements and stuff like that. But now, regardless of who thought it up or during which presidency these things were being planned, now is when we're seeing these like really big dramatic changes, and so many of them. And with President Nelson in his talks, I've never seen anything like this. Not even with President Hinckley. And then not even with President Benson, because he would be, according to my research and the stuff I've put together, President Nelson is at the number one spot in terms of second coming talk. And then after that comes President Benson. And then after that, President Hinckley. So we're just living during a very, very exciting time, hearing things that we haven't heard any other president of the church say, like time is running out, like just like that, time is running out. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'm doing what I can to pay attention and keep track of these things, and we're watching it all together, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.